Every family gathers at funerals with heavy hearts, but some also come with sharpened knives. In case number 4, what began as grief soon turned into a courtroom war. They called it the inheritance trap. Harold Whitman, a man of wealth and reputation, died on a cold January morning. His family gathered in the grand old church, his son Daniel, strong and quiet, his daughter Claire, fierce and independent, and his second wife Margaret, whose eyes hid both sorrow and calculation. Neighbors whispered, "With all that money, how will it be divided?" Days later, the family attorney opened Harold's will in his oak-paneled office. The room was silent as he read aloud. "I leave the Whitman estate, including all properties, accounts, and holdings, solely to my son, Daniel Whitman." Gasps filled the air. Claire's hands trembled. "What about me?" she asked. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your father left you a trust fund of $10,000, a fortune reduced to crumbs." Claire's eyes burned with disbelief. "My father would never cut me out. This isn't his voice. This isn't his heart." Daniel remained calm, almost cold. "It's his signature. It's final." Claire stood, her voice breaking. "Or maybe you made sure it was final." The first spark had been struck. Soon the entire estate would burn in conflict. Within weeks, the case was filed in probate court. Whitman estate dispute, Claire Whitman versus Daniel Whitman. Allegations: forgery, undue influence, manipulation of a dying man. The courthouse would now decide not just property, but loyalty, betrayal, and bloodlines. Every inheritance carries memory. Every memory carries pain. And in this courtroom, pain was about to testify. This was the inheritance trap, where grief became greed and love became leverage. The judge entered, a tall figure with silver hair and a sharp gaze. The bailiff called the case: Whitman estate dispute, Claire Whitman versus Daniel Whitman. The gallery leaned forward. A family's fortune was about to be placed under a microscope. Claire's attorney, Ms. Helen Grant, rose with authority. "Your Honor, this is not about greed. This is about deception. My client's father, Harold Whitman, was a man of fairness. Yet in his final document, he allegedly left his daughter, the daughter he adored, almost nothing. We will show evidence of undue influence, irregular signatures, and witness testimony that proves this will does not reflect Harold's true intentions." Claire nodded subtly, her jaw tight, her hands clenched in her lap. Daniel's attorney, Mr. Edward Cole, stood smoothly. His voice was deep, confident. "Your Honor, grief clouds judgment. The will is valid. It was signed, notarized, and executed with proper witnesses. The decedent, Harold Whitman, chose to secure his business legacy through his son. That was his right. Ms. Whitman's challenge is not about fairness. It is about envy." Daniel adjusted his tie, glancing briefly at Claire. His look carried no sympathy, only certainty. Ms. Grant stepped forward. "Your Honor, we present Exhibit A, the last will and testament signed on December 12th. She placed it on the judge's bench. "Now, Exhibit B, Harold Whitman's signature from earlier documents, contracts, checks, even holiday cards." She flipped them on the projector. The gallery gasped. The December signature shook, jagged, unlike the steady hand in earlier years. Claire's heart pounded. The difference was clear, even to the untrained eye. Next came Exhibit C, Harold's hospital records. Ms. Grant's voice sharpened. On December 12th, Harold Whitman was heavily sedated for pneumonia and heart failure. He was on morphine. The judge leaned forward. "And yet this is the day he supposedly read and signed a new will, leaving everything to one child." The words landed like a hammer. Daniel's lawyer objected. "Speculation. Patients often sign documents in medical settings." The judge overruled. "We'll let the handwriting expert speak." A gray-haired handwriting analyst, Dr. Milton, took the stand. He adjusted his spectacles, examined the signatures with a magnifier. "In my professional opinion, Exhibit A does not match the natural flow of Harold Whitman's hand. The tremors suggest either duress or imitation." Claire closed her eyes, whispering, "I knew it." Daniel, however, clenched his jaw, his knuckles white on the table. Mr. Cole rose. "Dr. Milton, are you aware Harold was 84 years old? Tremors are natural with age and illness." The expert nodded. "True. But illness alone does not explain the structural differences in letter formation." Cole pressed harder. So you admit you cannot prove forgery, only suggest doubt. Milton sighed. Correct. But in matters of inheritance, doubt is a heavy word. Judge Reynolds, yes, the same who had handled custody battles, looked over the exhibits. His voice was low but strong. This court does not tolerate manipulation. If undue influence is proven, this will fall apart. If it is not, then grief must not rewrite history. Continue your evidence. The truth will decide, not speculation. And so, the war began not with property, but with pen strokes. A trembling signature, a hospital bed, and a daughter's cry of injustice. The Whitman estate hung in balance, and the courtroom prepared for more revelations. This was just the beginning of the inheritance trap. The next witness was a nurse, Ms. Evelyn Harper, who had cared for Harold Whitman in his final days. She walked to the stand in a crisp uniform, her hands steady. Claire's lawyer asked softly, "Miss Harper, on December 12th, do you recall Harold's condition?" The nurse nodded. "Yes, he was weak on morphine. He struggled even to hold a cup of water. Signing a legal document? I find that unlikely," the gallery murmured. Claire felt her throat tighten with hope. Daniel's lawyer rose. "Nurse Harper, isn't it true patients often have moments of clarity? Lucid intervals even under medication?" She sighed. "Yes, sometimes. But not Harold. Not that day." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Next came a man in his 70s, cane in hand. Robert Gray, Harold's business partner of 30 years. His voice was raspy, but his memory sharp. "Harold told me just weeks before he passed that he wanted both children to share the estate. He said, 'Claire may not run the company, but she's still my daughter. She'll be taken care of.'" Claire's eyes flooded with tears. Daniel shook his head, whispering, "He never said that." Daniel's lawyer pressed, "Mr. Gray, are you aware Harold executed a valid will years earlier that favored Daniel?" Robert nodded. "Yes, but he said he'd update it. Harold was stubborn, but he wasn't cruel. Then came the shock." Claire's attorney pulled out a small flash drive. "Your Honor, Exhibit F, a voicemail left by Harold Whitman on December 5th, 1 week before the contested will." The court clerk played it aloud. Harold's voice, weak but clear, filled the courtroom. "Claire, I've spoken to Daniel about splitting the estate fairly. I want you both to have peace. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The recording ended. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Claire covered her face, sobbing silently. Daniel's face hardened, color draining. His lawyer objected, authentication needed. Anyone could mimic his voice, but the judge leaned in. "The court will allow a forensic audio analysis." Suspense thickened. From the gallery, Margaret, the second wife, Harold's widow, shifted uncomfortably. Until now, she had stayed silent. But whispers grew. What role did she play? Claire's lawyer eyed her sharply. "Mrs. Whitman, you may be called to testify. Did you witness Harold signing the will?" Margaret's lips trembled. I was in the room," the courtroom gasped. She had not been listed as a witness in the documents. Why now? Why silence until this moment? Judge Reynolds raised his gavel. "This case is no longer about just inheritance. It is about integrity. This court will examine whether undue influence was exercised by either Daniel Whitman or Margaret Whitman in the execution of this will." The room fell silent. Suddenly, it was not just a sibling war. It was a question of manipulation at Harold's deathbed. For the first time, Daniel spoke loudly in court, rising from his seat. "I didn't forge anything. Father trusted me with the company, with his legacy. Claire always ran away from responsibility. She doesn't deserve it." His voice cracked, anger spilling. The judge's gavel slammed. "Mr. Whitman, you will not testify without oath. Sit down." Daniel's chest heaved as he obeyed, but his words hung heavy. Claire's eyes burned brighter. "This isn't about what I deserve," she whispered almost to herself. "It's about what he wanted. And I will prove it." She clenched her fists. For her, this battle was no longer just for inheritance. It was for her father's voice, silenced too soon. And so, the courtroom now carried more than documents. It carried a nurse's warning, an old friend's memory, a daughter's tearful voicemail, and the silent shadow of a widow whose role was unclear. The Whitman estate was no longer just a fortune. It was a battlefield of truth and lies. And in the inheritance trap, Every testimony pulled another thread from the mask of the perfect house. Claire's lawyer finished questioning Nurse Harper. Now Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Cole, rose. His voice carried edge. "Nurse Harper, you testified Harold struggled to hold a cup of water. Yet you're not a handwriting expert. How can you state he couldn't sign?" Harper's jaw tightened. "Because I saw him try to hold a pen that morning. His hand shook so violently he dropped it." The gallery stirred. Cole leaned closer. "But could he in theory have rallied for a few minutes?" She glared. "Not without someone guiding his hand." The room gasped. Robert Gray, Harold's old friend, was cross-examined next. Cole smirked. "Mr. Gray, your business with Harold ended bitterly, didn't it? You were cut out of the company." Robert's cane tapped the floor. "We had disagreements, yes. But Harold was still my friend." Cole pressed harder. "And isn't it true you would benefit if Claire inherits, perhaps through her generosity?" Robert snapped. "I don't want his money. I want his truth honored." His voice shook, but it rang sincere. Next came the voicemail. An audio expert confirmed the voice was Harold's, recorded on his phone. Daniel's lawyer tried one last defense. The message could have been casual. Words said in weakness, not intent for law. Claire's lawyer countered, voice firm. But intent is exactly what this court must decide. And his intent was clear. He wanted fairness. The judge scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. Finally, all eyes turned to Harold's widow, Margaret Whitman. She walked slowly to the stand, pearls around her neck, face pale. Claire's lawyer wasted no time. "Mrs. Whitman, did you witness Harold sign the December 12th will?" Margaret hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, I was there." Gasps echoed. Claire's lawyer leaned in. "Did Harold read it? Did he understand it?" Margaret's eyes flickered. "He was very weak," Claire's lawyer pressed. "Mrs. Whitman, did anyone help Harold guide the pen?" Margaret's lips trembled. Her silence screamed louder than words. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel held his hand, only to steady it." The gallery exploded in whispers. Claire's lawyer pounced. "So you admit Harold could not sign unaided?" Daniel's lawyer objected, shouting, "That is not what she said." But the damage was done. Carla, Claire's lawyer, softened her tone. "Mrs. Whitman, did Harold ever tell you he wanted both children cared for?" Tears rolled down Margaret's cheeks. "Yes, many times. But Daniel insisted the company needed unity. He said splitting would destroy it." Claire stared, stunned. Daniel's fists clenched. Margaret sobbed harder. "I should have stopped it. But I was afraid of losing peace in the house." The courtroom froze, a confession wrapped in regret. Daniel jumped from his chair. "This is ridiculous. Father wanted me to lead." He knew Claire couldn't handle it. The gavel slammed. Judge Reynolds' voice thundered, "Mr. Whitman, sit down or be held in contempt." Daniel's chest rose and fell with fury as he dropped back into his chair. The courtroom buzzed, chaos barely contained. Judge Reynolds raised his voice, cutting through the noise. "This court will have order. What I have heard raises serious concerns of undue influence. Further testimony will continue. But let all parties hear me now. The truth is not a tool for inheritance. It is the law. And this court will not let grief be twisted into greed." The gavel echoed, sharp as thunder. Claire's lawyer approached the bench with a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced from Harold Whitman's personal safe. A second document, handwritten, dated November 28th, just 2 weeks before the contested will." The judge arched an eyebrow. The envelope was opened, and inside lay a folded sheet of lined paper, Harold's handwriting across it. The clerk read aloud, "To my children, Daniel and Claire, I want both of you to share what I have built. Daniel may lead the company, but Claire must never be cut out. She is my blood, my daughter, my legacy. Divide fairly." The gallery gasped. Claire wept. Daniel's face drained of color. The handwriting expert returned to the stand, examined the note. His verdict was swift. "This is unquestionably Harold Whitman's hand. Natural strokes, no tremor, no assistance, authentic." The courtroom buzzed. Claire clutched her lawyer's arm. Daniel leaned forward, whispering harshly to his attorney, his composure cracking. But the storm wasn't over. Claire's lawyer pulled another folder. "Exhibit G, bank records from December 10th, 2 days before the will. large transfers from Harold's account into Daniel's business account, authorized with a shaky signature identical to the contested will. We argue undue influence, possibly even fraud. The judge's eyes darkened. Daniel slammed a fist against the table, his lawyer whispering furiously for him to stay silent. Then Margaret, Harold's widow, rose suddenly, tears streaming. "I can't stay silent anymore." Daniel pressured his father. He brought the lawyer into the hospital that day. Harold didn't want to sign, but Daniel insisted it was just paperwork for the company. He didn't realize it was a will. The gallery erupted into chaos. Reporters scribbled. Gasps echoed. Daniel shouted, "Lies!" but his voice trembled. Judge Reynolds slammed the gavel, his voice cutting through the storm. "Enough! This court will not be turned into theater. But what I have seen and heard raises the gravest suspicion of undue influence, manipulation, and betrayal of a dying man's trust. This is no longer simply probate, it borders on fraud." The room went silent. The weight of his words hung like thunderclouds. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked. His shoulders slumped, his eyes wet. He whispered, "I only wanted to protect the company. To keep it strong." His words were half confession, half plea. Claire stared at him, tears mixing with anger. The judge watched him closely, his face unreadable. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, his voice steady as a blade. "This court will issue its ruling after full review of the hidden letter, financial records, and testimony. But let it be clear, Harold Whitman's true wishes were not to divide his children, but to unite them. Whether greed or fear drove this scheme, the court will not let betrayal rewrite his legacy." The gavel struck once, not as closure, but as warning. The court recessed. Reporters swarmed the hallway. Claire stood tall, clutching the handwritten letter close to her chest, as though holding her father's voice. Daniel, pale and broken, pushed past cameras, refusing to answer questions. Margaret wept silently in a corner, torn between loyalty to her stepson and guilt for her silence. The storm was not over, but the walls of deception had already begun to collapse. The courtroom filled again, hushed but electric. Judge Reynolds entered with the file in his hand, pages heavy with evidence. Handwriting analysis, medical reports, the hidden letter, financial transfers, and Margaret's confession. He adjusted his glasses, his voice carrying finality. "This court is ready to rule." Judge Reynolds spoke steadily. "The December 12th will is invalid. The court finds undue influence, executed under conditions that void its legitimacy. Evidence shows Harold Whitman was incapacitated and pressured. The financial transfers further support manipulation." Daniel closed his eyes, his body sinking into the chair. The judge continued. "The handwritten letter of November 28th, authenticated and consistent with Harold Whitman's hand and voice, reflects his true intent, that both his children share his estate. Accordingly, the estate will be divided equally between Claire Whitman and Daniel Whitman." Claire's tears streamed, relief and grief intertwining. Daniel sat frozen, pale, his fists unclenching slowly. Judge Reynolds' voice grew firm. "Let this be remembered. Inheritance is not a prize to be stolen, but a trust to be honored. Betrayal, whether born of greed or fear, cannot erase a father's true wishes. This court stands for justice, not manipulation." The gavel struck. Final. Absolute. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Claire clutched her father's letter against her chest. She told cameras softly, "This isn't about money. It's about my father's voice being heard." Her words carried strength, but her eyes carried loss. She had won, but the price was her family. Daniel pushed past microphones, refusing to speak. Alone in the parking lot, he whispered to himself, "I only wanted to protect it." His reflection in the car window looked less like a victor, more like a man haunted by his own choices. The estate was split, but the trust was broken forever. Margaret stood by the courthouse steps, tears glistening. "I should have spoken sooner," she whispered to no one. Guilt pressed heavily, but so did relief. Relief that Harold's true wishes had finally been honored. She walked away slowly, carrying both shame and closure. Weeks later, Claire returned to the old Whitman house. She walked through the halls, touching the wooden banister, the photographs still on the walls. She whispered, "We'll keep it together, Dad, just like you wanted." The house stood tall, but quieter now, carrying both memory and forgiveness. Daniel managed the company, but now under strict legal oversight. His ambition was tempered by loss, his pride scarred by the trial. Claire supported causes their father once loved, keeping his softer legacy alive. The inheritance was split, but so were their lives. And so ended the Whitman estate battle, the inheritance trap. A perfect house torn open by hidden storms, a father's voice nearly silenced by greed, but rescued in time by truth. Families can fracture, money can tempt, but in the end, justice speaks loud.